Tether just got pushed out the back door of Europe, and almost nobody is talking about it yet. $17.5 billion worth of stablecoin liquidity is about to vanish from regulated exchanges across the European Union, and that kind of vacuum doesn't stay empty for long. Something has to rush in to fill it. And after digging through the actual regulatory filings, the timelines, and the moves Ripple has been quietly making behind the scenes, I'm convinced this could be one of the most underrated stories in crypto right now. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why XRP and RLUSD might be sitting in the perfect spot at the perfect moment. Let's start with what's actually happening, because the headlines don't tell the full story. Europe built a brand new rulebook for digital money called MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. Buried inside that framework is a strict set of rules for what regulators call e-money tokens, basically any stablecoin pegged to a real currency. To stay listed on a regulated European exchange, the company behind that stablecoin needs to become a licensed e-money institution or a credit institution, complete with reserve audits, transparency requirements, and ongoing oversight. Tether looked at that rulebook and essentially said, no thanks. Publicly, the company has stated that the structure conflicts with how it runs its reserves and its business. So instead of adapting, Tether chose to stay outside the perimeter. The problem is, staying outside the perimeter in Europe now means getting cut off from the inside. That's exactly what's unfolding. Exchanges like Coinbase Europe, Kraken EU, Crypto.com, Binance, and others have already started delisting or restricting USDT trading pairs for European customers to stay compliant with the law. People can still hold Tether in their own wallets or move it through decentralized platforms, but the big regulated venues, the ones most everyday investors actually use, are shutting the door. Picture what that really means in practice. Tether currently sits at roughly $186 billion in total circulation. Cutting $17.5 billion of that out of the regulated European market isn't a rounding error, it's a structural shock to liquidity. Every trading pair that used USDT as its base currency now needs a replacement. Every market maker who relied on that liquidity needs a new partner. Every exchange needs something else to plug into that slot. This is where things get interesting for Ripple. While Tether was digging its heels in, Ripple was doing the opposite. It's been quietly building out a European regulatory presence, securing electronic money institution licensing through a subsidiary, specifically so that RLUSD, its dollar-pegged stablecoin, can eventually slot into the MiCA framework as an authorized e-money token. As of right now, RLUSD hasn't fully cleared that authorization process and isn't yet listed on the European Securities Regulator's official registry. But the groundwork is laid and the direction is obvious. Ripple isn't fighting the rules, it's racing to satisfy them. And here's the part that really stands out to me. Ripple has historically been laser-focused on institutional and cross-border payment use cases, not necessarily on flooding retail exchanges. But a vacuum this size doesn't just create opportunity for one player. It tempts every serious competitor to step in. Circle's USDC is already positioned well in Europe and is likely to soak up a meaningful chunk of that displaced liquidity. But I don't see Ripple sitting on the sidelines while that happens. The infrastructure they've built strongly suggests they're preparing to make a real push once that authorization clears. While all of this drama plays out in Europe, the United States is going through its own regulatory shakeup, and it lines up almost perfectly with the European timeline. Federal regulators in the U.S., including the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and credit union regulators, have jointly proposed a new rule that would treat payment stablecoin issuers like full financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. This stems from legislation often referred to as the Genius Act, which created an entirely new category of federally regulated stablecoin issuers. Under this framework, any company offering a dollar-pegged stablecoin to U.S. users would need full identity verification programs, sanctions screening, anti-money laundering controls, and crucially, the technical ability to freeze or burn tokens when ordered to by law enforcement. That last requirement is a big deal. It draws a hard line between stablecoins built for compliance from day one and stablecoins that were designed to operate with maximum flexibility and minimal oversight. Tether's existing USDT doesn't fit neatly into this new American framework either. Its reserve composition has historically included assets beyond simple cash and short-term government debt, which clashes with the narrow, highly liquid reserve standards regulators are now demanding. In response, Tether has already announced a separate, newly structured stablecoin intended specifically for US compliance, distinct from the original USDT that has powered crypto trading for years. Think about that for a second. The company is essentially building a parallel product because its flagship token can't meet the new rules on either side of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, tokens built from the ground up with regulators in mind, the kind backed by chartered trust companies and subject to direct oversight from banking authorities, are exactly what this new wave of legislation seems to favor. That description fits RLUSD far more comfortably than it fits legacy USDT, and the numbers are already starting to show it. RLUSD has grown more than 60% in just the past month, climbing toward the $770 million mark, and that's only counting its presence on the XRP ledger, not even factoring in its expansion on Ethereum. Something is clearly shifting in demand, quietly, before most retail traders have even noticed the headlines. It's not just RLUSD gaining ground either. Other exchanges have already begun cutting ties with Tether ahead of full enforcement, with some platforms announcing they'll migrate all USDT trading pairs to alternative stablecoins within weeks. When you consider how many trading pairs across major assets like XRP, Cardano, and Stellar were built on top of Tether liquidity, you start to realize just how much room there is for a new player to step into that role. On top of all this, MiCA's broader licensing crackdown is squeezing the entire exchange landscape in Europe. Thousands of crypto firms that used to operate across the EU are being narrowed down to only a few hundred that have actually secured proper licensing. Even major players like Binance are reportedly facing roadblocks in certain countries as their license applications run into trouble. The entire European crypto market is consolidating around firms that can prove compliance, and that consolidation naturally favors assets and companies that planned for this moment instead of resisting it. So here's where this leaves us. Europe is forcing out the largest stablecoin in the world from its regulated exchanges because that stablecoin refused to play by the new rules. At the exact same time, the United States is tightening its own framework in a way that doesn't favor that same token either. Caught in the middle of both shifts is a regulated, bank-chartered, purpose-built alternative that has spent years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Ripple didn't just stumble into this position by luck. It built toward it deliberately, plank by plank, license by license. Nobody can say for certain how large RLUSD's role will end up being once the dust settles, or exactly how fast European authorization will come through. But the structural setup here is hard to ignore. A massive liquidity gap is opening up in one of the largest financial markets on the planet, and very few stablecoins are positioned to legally and credibly fill it the way RLUSD appears to be. This is the kind of story that doesn't always make the loudest headlines while it's happening, but tends to look obvious in hindsight once the numbers catch up to the regulation. Keep an eye on that European Securities Registry, keep an eye on RLUSD's growth numbers, and keep an eye on how fast these exchanges adapt over the coming weeks. If you found this breakdown valuable, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more people who need to see this kind of analysis. Drop a comment below sharing your own take on how this plays out for XRP and RLUSD in Europe. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update the moment this story develops further. Thank you so much for watching, stay sharp out there, and I'll catch you in the next one.